As we look at inverse functions, this is concept 5.5b that we are talking about, and we're talking about inverse functions. What is an inverse function? Well, the definition of an inverse function is when the domain and the range trade places. All elements of the domain become the range, and all elements of the range become the domain. So if you think of an inverse function, if we have f of x and you have the points 0, 3, 1, 4, and 2, 5, the inverse, written f to the negative 1 power of x, read as the inverse of x, is going to be, switching them around, 3, 0, 4, 1, 5, 2. In this case, it was a function, and in this case, it was also a function. Notice, as we are looking at domain and range, our function is a, b, c. A goes to 3, b to 1, c to 2. The inverse, the domain now becomes what our range was, 1, 2, and 3, and it gives us our range of a, b, and c. I want you to think of that inverse function. If you ever looked at your calculator and you have this x to the negative 1, it also means inverse. And the type of inverse it is it's a multiplicative inverse. And a lot of times what you have learned is that the multiplicative inverse is actually the same as what we have often referred to in mathematics as your reciprocal. So if you try this on your calculator before you come to class tomorrow, and you put in 4, and then you hit the x to the negative 1, you should get 0.25, which is 1/4. If you put in 2, x to the negative 1, or inverse, would give us 0.5. So make sure you try that on your calculator before class tomorrow. Our first function here, 0, 1, 1, 2, and 3, 2. If we take the inverse of this function, is it still a function? 1, 0, 2, 1, and 2, 3. The first one was a function. The second one, is it a function? It is not a function. And the key thing to think about with this is that when we are looking at if it's a function or not, the key thing to keep in mind is for each input is there one output. So this one would not be a function. Here are some examples of inverse functions if we're thinking about what an inverse function looks like. The first one, and then our inverse. The red is the function, the green and blue is our inverse. The red is the function, the blue is the inverse. So many different ways that it could look. I don't think the video is going to work, but we'll look at that tomorrow in class so that you can see that. How do you find the inverse of a function? First off, f of x is equal to negative 2x plus 4. The first thing you want to do is replace your f of x with a y. Keep the x where it was. So first, put those in place, the y and x, and then switch. This is a key thing right here. You need to switch these around. What do I mean switch? Well, every place where y is, it becomes an x. Once you've done that, you now want to solve for y. When you solve for y, that will be our inverse function. So if we are solving for y, the first thing we're going to do is subtract 4. Then we divide everything by a negative 2. That gives us a negative 1/2 plus 2 equals y. We can't leave our function, our inverse function, written like this. We want to use the correct notation, f to the negative 1 to show inverse. And the inverse function is going to be negative 1/2 x plus 2. It's now your turn. We're going to write the inverse function of each of these. So what is our first step? Our first step in writing this, step 1, remember, is to switch the x and y. So x equals 2y minus 8. Next step, we want to get y by itself. We're going to add 8 to both sides. So x plus 8 is now equal to 2y. Please finish solving this for y, and then write your new equation. Pause the video so that you can try it on your own, and then you can see mine. By dividing them each by 2, we are going to have y equals 1/2 x plus 4. But again, we want to write the inverse function, so f to the negative 1 of x, inverse function, is going to be 1/2 x plus 4. Please make sure in your notes you have done this problem. I'm going to start you with your first step of x equals -3/4 y plus 3, and you will finish the problem for tomorrow's notes. Hope you're having a good lesson and this goes okay. Tomorrow we'll move to do some in-class activities.